Whoa. Landing an account this big will totally change my landscaping business. It's gonna mean hiring more guys and more equipment and new trucks for the new guys to drive the new equipment in. I don't know if I'm ready.
You can do this, and Ford Pro FinSimple can help. Our experts are ready to make growing pains less painful for your business with flexible financing solutions that meet the needs of your business today when you need them. Get started at fordpro.com/financing.
Today on CityCast Houston, like you and millions of other Houstonians, I lost power in the wake of Hurricane Beryl. And of course, I'm frustrated with our power company, Centerpoint. So how long are we going to be left in the dark? And why hasn't the response been faster when we knew we'd be impacted in some way by Beryl? Houston Landing's Paul Cobler is joining me to answer those questions and more. By the way, you might hear some kids and noise in the background. As I mentioned earlier, I'm without power right now, so I'm at my brother's house along with 10 other family members. It's Wednesday, July 10th. I'm Raheel Ramzanali, and here's what Houston's talking about. Hey, Paul, how are you, man?
Hey, Raheel, I'm doing pretty well. How are you doing, man?
I'm doing okay. You know what? Been better, like most Houstonians, just kind of exhausted, frustrated. How about you? How did you do during the storm? Everything good?
Yeah, everything went pretty well. It was obviously a little gnarly watching out my window, but I, by some miracle, managed to keep my power, which is going to be the main topic of our show today. I know I am one of the very lucky few that's in that situation.
And Paul, you're actually going to serve a bigger role here because this is almost like a therapy session for me, and my frustration with Centerpoint is at an all-time high. So I apologize in advance right now, but how do we get here? And what I mean is, we knew the hurricane was going to impact us in some form. And I understand it was a bigger impact than what we anticipated. But once again, it feels like Centerpoint wasn't ready. And now over 1 million people are left in the dark in this blistering heat. That number was originally at 2 million, and they've been working hard to bring that number down. But what happened? How did we get here?
Yeah, Raheel, you're definitely not going to be the only person a little done with Centerpoint Energy after the last couple of months we've had with them. You know, this storm, Hurricane Beryl, it took a pretty late sort of right turn towards Houston on Sunday. And the energy company Centerpoint has said that the effects of the storm were a lot more substantial than they expected. It's caused a lot of damage across the city. I think our peak was about 2.2 million people without power across the region. And as of me checking, at the time of taping this, we're at about 1.8 million Centerpoint customers that are out of power and more than 2 million as of Tuesday morning, if you include all the utilities in our region. So it is a very, this was a serious storm. It did a lot of damage. But I think the frustration, where it's coming from for most people, has been the lack of communication from Centerpoint. I think we all remember the same issue with the derecho. The energy outage map that Centerpoint maintains, that's usually like a great resource for being able to see specifically on your street when restoration is expected. That's been down since May and will continue to be down. They're expecting to launch some sort of new map at the end of July, but basically we're just all kind of left trying to read the tea leaves from the news releases as far as when you and your specific area might get power back. And that's not really satisfying for a lot of people when it's as hot as it is.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up that map, right? Because it's been out since that derecho due to technical issues, right? And a Centerpoint spokesperson, I heard them on News 88.7 saying that it should be ready by the end of July. But here we are with thousands without power and little information. This has just gotten to a point where, like, what do we do with Centerpoint, right? Like, this is something that they should have had ready for hurricane season, knowing what is to come and what usually happens around the city of Houston. Like, how did they drop the ball so badly here?
Yeah, I think we're also kind of just a victim of past infrastructure decisions. I mean, I've lived in Louisiana, I've lived in South Texas, and I've lived through now a couple strong hurricanes. And every time the storm's on the way and I'm just driving around the city looking at all of these power lines hanging around trees and above ground. And I'm like, man, this is not a new issue. Why don't we, prepare our infrastructure ahead of time? And, this is something that Centerpoint says it's trying to do. They have a large investment coming in and are trying to harden the infrastructure that they do have, put in stronger telephone poles, stuff like that. But that's going to be a, years and years long process that they're starting to undertake just in the next year. So we are nowhere near, being at a point where we can get hit by a Category 1 hurricane and not have these effects, or hit by a derecho and not have these effects. And that's kind of what we're victim of. I mean, our infrastructure, the city we live in, is not ready for the types of storms that we're starting to see with more and more frequency as climate change becomes a more serious problem here.
Isn't that crazy that we are not ready for something that we know is going to impact the city somehow, some way? And you know what? I want to give some credit to Centerpoint. They did say that they're bringing in 7,000 more workers to help with the recovery efforts, bringing that total number of workers to 12,000. But again, I'm going to go back to my frustration. Why weren't those workers here ready to deploy right after the hurricane, knowing what we knew?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I don't know. I think a lot of that does come down to the storm's late turn. I mean, they certainly stage people ahead of time, but yeah, I mean, this, I think, just caught everybody off guard, residents, energy companies included. I think we all hope for better from the folks that are in charge of keeping the power on in our house. But, this is a really strange situation to have a hurricane this early in the year. So I know that FEMA, I know that the energy companies all around the Gulf spent a lot of time preparing for hurricane season. I'm not sure exactly what happened here, but it's a significant storm. I think it's going to be quite the process to get everybody back online. And I can, just to sort of make you feel maybe a little better, this might just frustrate you more. This is sort of what we know at this point. We're expecting, from per Centerpoint, 1 million people to be restored by the end of Wednesday. That's from a peak of about 2.2 million. So I think that will largely be people with more minor damage, just like lines that have been taken down by trees, but that's not necessarily including the folks that have a power line snapped in half. That's not including the folks where their streets blocked by a tree. So it's really going to kind of differ depending on the damage that you have sustained and the damage in the area around you and how easy it is for crews to get there. So that's kind of one of the reasons it's so difficult, I think, to give a timeline. They said on Monday during a news conference that the city held in the afternoon, a Centerpoint official was there, said what they're currently doing right now is assessing the damage. And that requires linemen to walk all through their infrastructure, see whether it's just something that needs to be repaired or replaced altogether. And then at that point, once they've finished that assessment, they will be able to give estimates on when power restoration will come back in certain areas. And so they're doing an assessment to give you an estimate. We don't know exactly how long that estimate is going to take at this point. So that is definitely not going to be satisfying to a lot of people, I'm sure. Mm-hmm. But they did say to expect, quote, prolonged outages in the hardest hit areas of the storm. For non-Centerpoint customers, there's about 230K Entergy and Texas, New Mexico Power customers in the greater Houston area that are also without power. Neither of those companies have given a really specific timeline, although Entergy did say they expect it to take, quote, about a couple days before they have power back online. Like you said, there are line crews coming in from all over. And yeah, that's what we know. We have to hold our breath. And, these linemen, like you and I have talked about after the derecho, they all work their ass off. They come in from way out of town to do this stuff. And, it's the company that deserves the finger to be pointed at them. And we just need to hold our breath and hope that these guys can do the work that they know how to do well and get everybody back to normal as fast as possible.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because all the love to the linemen out there, but this is about Centerpoint, all right? For the 1 million people that they said that power is going to be back by the end of today, can they trust them? Can they trust Centerpoint?
Yeah, well, and as of taping, which is about 24 hours after the storm cleared our area, Centerpoint had restored 285,000 customers. That is a large number of people. But again, I kind of want to emphasize, I think the folks that get their power back on first are going to have some of the more limited damage, and it sort of spreads out from there. It really just comes down to your circumstances. So I don't think it's out of the question that they could have 1 million people restored by the end of the day today. But it's going to be really, the question for those 1.2 million folks who are remaining, is this going to be a 2-day thing? Is this going to be a week-long thing? Is this going to be several weeks? I just, remembering Hurricane Ike, I'm sure a lot of people here remember, 2008, it took weeks for power to come back in some places. And so we are all definitely hoping we avoid a situation like this, especially with how hot it's supposed to be in the coming weeks.
Has Centerpoint commented on that, on the prolonged outages, how long that's going to be, roughly?
They have not at this point. There is no estimate passed. We are doing an assessment, and upon the completion of the assessment, we will have an estimate for you.
Want to know one of my favorite sounds? Here it is. That's the sound I hear when I'm learning Spanish with Babel. And if you want to learn a new language this year, I guarantee it'll be one of your favorite sounds too. I'm David Plotz. I'm the CEO of CityCast, and I've been doing Babel for a few weeks, and it's been so much fun. This week, I've been learning lots of food vocabulary and how to order in a restaurant. This is one of the things I love about Babel, is that it's about learning the language so that you can use it. As Babel says, it's designed by real people for real conversation. So it's all based on real life situations. And these restaurant lessons are awesome. When I went to Mexico City last year with my girlfriend, I was mute. I was a mute. But next time, I'm going to be ordering the sopes and las salsas picantes. Babel has over 16 million subscriptions sold, plus all of Babel's 14 award-winning language courses are backed by their 20-day money-back guarantee. Here's a special limited-time deal for CityCast listeners. Right now, get up to 60% off your Babel subscription, but only for CityCast listeners at babbel.com/CityCast. Get up to 60% off at babbel.com/CityCast. Spelled BABBEL.com/CityCast. Rules and restrictions may apply.
I'm glad you brought up Hurricane Ike because I want to compare this to recent storms and historical ones like Hurricane Ike. How does this compare to those storms?
Well, we're pretty much on par with Ike as far as total outages. Maybe just a little more coming off the top of my head, but these are big major hurricanes that do a lot of damage across a wide area. I think we think back to the derecho as the most kind of recent example. I want to say that was about 1 million people that were out of power from that storm, but it was a much smaller, faster moving storm that kind of tore a swath through the city. And so there were also folks who were weeks without power from that storm too, but it was more limited and the recovery effort could be a lot more focused. There weren't, tree limbs just getting into the city that line workers are having to deal with, stuff like that. Versus when you think about a hurricane, this is the entire region that has been affected. We're thinking Galveston, we're thinking Fort Bend got really hit hard, Harris County, of course, and many of the surrounding counties around us. Everybody is going to need power. And even if this damage may not be quite as serious as what the derecho did in some places because that had stronger wind speeds, it's certainly more spread out over a far, far larger area and affects far, far more people, double the amount of people from the derecho, but weaker wind speeds. It's just a slower, larger storm. And so the effect is kind of different.
During Hurricane Harvey, look, it was absolutely terrifying. So many people lost so many houses and things, and it was just devastating. But one thing from Harvey that I remember was that we had cell service the entire time. We were getting information. One of the things after Beryl has been cell service has been very spotty. I've been standing in this one portion of my house just trying to get some kind of update on Facebook or X or WhatsApp groups, just trying to figure out when are we going to get power back? What's happening right now in the city of Houston? Any info on what's happening there and when cell service is going to be stabilized?
Yeah, I think they're expecting that to happen over the coming days as power starts to come back online. This is again something that's unfortunately not unique to Harris County. I think it's just another example of our infrastructure not quite being up to date with the intensity and frequency of the storms that we're seeing. When Hurricane Ida, I covered as a reporter in Louisiana a couple of years ago, and I remember very vividly being down by the coast in some of the hardest hit areas, and there was just it's like a different world. There's no cell service. Nobody has any access to any information. Folks are, coming up to me, asking me to go stop by their house on my way down just to see if it was still standing because there just was zero way to get information, zero way to get around. So we are not having those effects, thankfully, but I know there are large parts of the region that are without cell service. So from what we're hearing, that's something that should be coming online pretty much as we're speaking now. But it's going to be spotty in some places. It's not going to be just a clean, suddenly it's back on like your power,
What about water service? What are you hearing about that? Any issues right now in the Houston area, Harris County areas? What's happening?
Yeah, so the mayor's office has been pretty positive about our water and wastewater situation at this point. There is a boil notice as of time of taping this yesterday in North Harris County in the Southbrook subdivision, which is in the Greenspoint area, but that is the only one that we are aware of at this point in the county or the greater region. And Yeah, past that, the mayor's office for the city of Houston has been very positive about our water distribution, about our wastewater collection. I think the biggest thing for that is it's going to help a lot that the rain has stopped, at least in our area. That can usually cause a lot of issues with wastewater backups. When you have serious flooding, that starts to get into the sewage system and causes a lot of issues there. So I think we should be happy that our streets are mostly cleared at this point, and keep an eye on those bayous and rivers, obviously. But I think that will make a big difference in terms of like the infrastructure for our water system and our sewage system.
For sure. That is a silver lining in all of this, is that for the most part, I know there are a few people out there with no water service right now, and we're thinking about you, and hopefully they're back online here soon. But for the most part, it seems like water was unaffected. So a good silver lining there. All right, Paul, one last thing. It's been complicated already. And look, frankly, this is going to add another layer to this recovery. The temperature is rising here in Houston. The National Weather Service put out a heat advisory for Tuesday, and the heat index could reach up to 106 degrees. Any tips or advice for folks who are trying to stay cool without power?
Yeah, this is always going to be difficult without power and with spotty cell service, but make sure you're checking on your neighbors. The thing that always stands out to me after any storm like this is kind of the sense of community that really comes out of it. Like I said, I'm not saying this to rub it into to you or your listeners. I've been lucky enough to have power and internet and water. So, my apartment has been a bit of a refugee camp. I've just had my colleagues coming in so they can charge their devices, so they can get a cold drink of water or whatever else they need. If you are at home, you don't have access to something like that, water. That's about it. Try not to exert yourself too much. Try to stay indoors out of the sun, even though I know the inside of your house is going to be hot. But, if you have older family members or younger ones too that are more vulnerable to the heat, you can do things like use a wash rag or a t-shirt, get that wet, put it on them. It will really help cool them off, cool their skin. And past that, drink a lot of water. Drink a lot of water. Stay in touch with people. Check on those around you that are vulnerable and might need help. That's really all we can do right now is we need to look out for each other. When these kind of societal breakdowns essentially happen where we lose these services we so rely on, all we have left is the community around us. So that's really all I can most encourage people to do, because that's going to make the biggest difference. If you're checking in with people, you have people checking in on you, that's going to keep you safe.
Agreed. And there are cooling stations around the city as well. We've linked those in our show notes. A lot of businesses are back up and open. So if you need a place to just go and hang out in the AC, recharge your phones, your power banks, all of that, you can do that as well. Again, we have to help each other out. This is another tough situation. Frankly, Paul, I'm kind of over this Houston Strong thing where we just have to constantly help each other out. I wish we could just, be okay, but that's not the case. Paul, thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, Houston Tired doesn't sound as good, but we're in this together.
That was Houston Landing reporter Paul Cobler. You can read his latest work with the link in our show notes. And while you're there, we have other resources and news for you there as well. Thank you for listening, and I hope this episode gave you a much needed break. If you found this episode helpful, please share it and leave us a review and rate the show. And don't forget to subscribe to our daily newsletter, Hey Houston. Hang in there, and just like every other storm, things will get better day by day. That will do it for today, and I hope you learned something new. Do y'all hear any kids in the background? Is it good?
No, sure.
Okay. We got 3 families in here in my brother's house because that's the only one with power. So, and 4 kids.